In this video, we're going to talk about the 1999 film, The World Is Not Enough. The movie that has the greatest and longest opening pre-credit action sequence in the entire franchise, until No Time to Die. The movie that has international icon Sophie Marceau, who is arguably the most beautiful Bond girl, who marks the franchise's first true female villain. And it's a movie where Denise Richards totally nails it as a nuclear physicist. Well, maybe not. Due to the financial success of the last movie, Tomorrow Never Dies, MGM went ahead and immediately approved the 19th James Bond film. They did offer Roger Spottiswoode a chance to return as director, but he declined. So Eon producer Barbara Broccoli went searching for a director that she actually liked. And one of her favorite directors was Peter Jackson, after seeing the 1994 Kate Winslet drama Heavenly Creatures. And Peter Jackson was a lifelong fan of James Bond and was really excited about the possibility of directing a Bond movie, and arranged for Barbara Broccoli to have a private screening of his most recent film, the 1996 horror comedy The Frighteners, starring Michael J. Fox. However, Barbara Broccoli basically hated this movie, and she hated it so much that she actually decided not to hire Peter Jackson and ended all negotiations with him. So Peter Jackson went ahead with the project that he was working on at the time, which was to continue to pitch Lord of the Rings all around Hollywood. I wonder how that turned out. A year later, a company called New Line Cinema finally approved Peter Jackson's project, and of course, history was made, and we will talk about the Lord of the Rings series sometime in the future. Now, another director that was considered was American director Joe Dante, who is probably best known for directing Gremlins 1 and 2, and he'd also directed Piranha, The Howling, and Inner Space, among many other movies. However, the director they ended up hiring was a man named Michael Apted, who had directed a lot of 80s classic movies such as Gorky Park, Gorillas in the Mist, The Coal Miner's Daughter, and Neal. And Michael Apted was also known for directing the documentary film series Up. No, not the Pixar animated film Up, but the documentary series that follows 10 boys and 4 girls and followed them every 7 years for 56 years from 1964 to 2019. And over his career, Michael Apted has been nominated for 7 Academy Awards, so he was a big deal. Now, the title of this film was going to be Bond 2000, and they were planning for a 2000 release rather than 1999 by stalling an extra year. However, ultimately they decided to bring this movie out on time in 1999, and they decided to change the title. And they played around with different titles and eventually settled on The World Is Not Enough. And the title is translated from the Latin motto Orbis Non Sufficit, given to George Lazenby's Bond when he researches his own coat of arms in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
3 Bessons. Good motto, eh? The world is not enough. Vivian's doing a splendid job. Thank you, Mr. Sable Basilisk.
The motto also appears in the original Ian Fleming novels, and it was the motto of King Philippe II of Spain. The title of The World Is Not Enough came from an early idea for this movie, which would have had James Bond facing against his own estranged son, who would be the villain of this movie and who would be seeking revenge against him. And the idea was that Bond had unknowingly fathered a child who had been given up for adoption. And man, that is a dark story. However, this original plot was ultimately rejected. So Barbara Broccoli came up with the idea for this movie in 1997, a month before the premiere of Tomorrow Never Dies. And she was watching a news report on Nightline about how oil companies were vying for control over untapped oil reserves in the Caspian Sea after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this episode reported that the last great oil discovery on the planet was in the region of Eastern Europe. And there were a lot of pipelines in the area, and they discussed these grand reservoirs of oil that existed below the Caspian Sea. And there are all these small towns in the region that had become centers of great affluence and wealth due to oil. And these towns also had these casinos that were emerging. And as it was no longer a Soviet jurisdiction, these major oil companies were fighting to get in there and take the oil. And Broccoli hypothesized that a James Bond villain may want to create a monopoly by destroying all his or her competitors and owning the only pipeline in the region of the Caspian Sea. You can see how this would influence this movie. And Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson hired the screenwriting team of Neal Purvis and Robert Wade. And in 1997, the two wrote uncredited rewrites of An American Werewolf in Paris, and they were primarily known for writing the action comedy film Plunkett and McLean, starring Robert Carlyle. And this was their first James Bond movie script, but from here, they'll go on to write Die Another Day, Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die, and they would also create the James Bond parody, Johnny English. Now, from the start, Neal Purvis and Robert Wade wanted to create a Pierce Brosnan movie that was essentially a Sean Connery film. In other words, go back to the feel of those Sean Connery 007 movies. They wanted to create a very realistic movie with lots of action, with a strong villain, and they also wanted James Bond to have the intensity of Sean Connery's Bond. However, as they wrote, they began to incorporate more humor and more elements associated with Roger Moore, elements like his humor and charm. After Neal Purvis and Robert Wade finished their original version of the script, director Michael Apted wanted the character of Elektra King to be further developed, and the studios actually suggested Michael Apted's then-wife, screenwriter Dana Stevens, to come in and do uncredited rewrites. And Dana Stevens was known for writing the 1993 film Blink, the 1998 City of Angels, and the 1999 For the Love of the Game. And today, she's probably best known for writing the 2022 film The Woman King. Now, Stevens worked on the script for 3 weeks, increasing the importance of both Elektra King and M. And the version was good, and they would eventually use many elements from her script, but it did push James Bond too much into the background. And so Bruce Feirstein was asked to come in and deliver the final rewrite, making sure that James Bond remained the main character and central focus of the movie. Now, Michael Apted wanted a strong European woman to play Elektra King. And several famous actresses like Sharon Stone and Vera Farmiga were considered, along with Catherine Zeta-Jones, Mila Jovovich, and Elizabeth Hurley. And even Monica Bellucci was considered again. However, the second Michael Apted met Sophie Marceau, he knew he had his Elektra King. And I'm glad they went with Sophie Marceau. You want an actress that can pull off the charisma, that can play and manipulate James Bond. And not a lot of women can pull that off, and I feel she does it very well. However, in the original script, Elektra King was not French, but the character of Christmas Jones actually was French. In fact, Christmas Jones was French-Polynesian, and she was an insurance investigator. However, with Sophie Marceau being cast as Elektra King, this made them change the character of Christmas Jones to be more American.
Or are you just hoping for a glimmer?
And be very spunky to contrast herself with Elektra King. And I'd always been aware that there was this international iconic beauty named Sophie Marceau. And in the 1980s, whenever I visited outside the US, she would be everywhere on posters and magazine covers. But inside the US, she was completely unknown. And in fact, the only time here in the US we learned about her was in the role of Princess Isabella in Braveheart. But other than that, she was pretty much unknown. So it was kind of nice to finally see her really in the spotlight. She is absolutely gorgeous. She's sexy, she's stunning, and she is completely a match for James Bond. And in an early draft of the script, Elektra King was portrayed as more sympathetic and more of a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. And she would actually survive the gunshot wound at the end, and at the end of the film, the movie would have James Bond visiting her at a mental hospital. However, this ending was judged to be too dull and too downbeat, and the writers elected for Elektra to be more of a conventional villain, and her death at the hands of Bond provides a very dramatic climax. Sophie Marceau was born in Paris, and she was the child of a shop assistant and a truck driver, and her parents divorced when she was 9. And when Sophie was 14 years old, she and her mother submitted photos to a modeling agency, and actually was certain nothing would come of it, but this led her to her being cast in her first movie, the 1980 French teen comedy, The Party. The movie was a hit, and she quickly became a popular French actress. And in the 1980s, she was huge in Japan, South Korea, and China, and was a cultural ambassador of France throughout the 80s. And in 1995, Braveheart made her an international superstar, and after The World Is Not Enough, in 2002, she made her directorial debut with a feature film, Speak to Me of Love, for which she was named Best Director at the Montreal World Film Festival, and would direct several more successful films. And to this day, she is still named as one of the most popular actresses in China. And in France, she is known as the French people's favorite actress. They also wanted a very strong actor to play the villain, and first offered the role to Javier Bardem, who turned it down. However, Bardem would later play a Bond villain in the 2012 film Skyfall. They then offered the role to Jean Reno, the professional, Leon the professional, and Reno also turned down the role. Now, Robert Carlyle, who had hit it big in 1997 with The Full Monty, accepted. And Carlyle makes a worthy villain in Renard, and Carlyle was tough. I mean, he's creepy, he's sadistic, and you can tell he is absolutely dangerous. And yet there's also something very sympathetic about this man, and that he can't feel anything, and I really feel in many ways the title can really be about him. Robert Carlyle was born in Glasgow and was raised solely by his father when his mother left them when Robert was only 4 years old. When he was 16 years old, he left school and began to work full-time with his father as a painter. However, he attended night school on his own, and when he was 21 years old, he read Arthur Miller's The Crucible and began to study drama at the Glasgow Art Centre, and later graduated from the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. At age 21, he and his friends founded a theater company and slowly began to be hired for TV roles. And then in 1996 and 1997, it was the 1-2 punch of being in Trainspotting and then starring in The Full Monty that propelled him to superstar status. And today he is known as a very committed method actor, and before playing a homeless character in Safe, he actually lived on the streets of London, and before playing a bus driver in Carla's Song, he passed a test for the PSV license to drive a passenger bus. And today he is a very prolific film and TV actor, and among his many roles include Durza in Aragon and Don Harrison 28 Weeks Later, and he played Dr. Nicholas Rush in Stargate Atlantis, and Mr. Gold, aka Rumpelstiltskin, in Disney's Once Upon a Time, as well as voicing Gabriel Belmont in the Castlevania video games. Now, I know I'm supposed to hate Denise Richards, everyone seems to, but I have to be honest, she really didn't bother me. And I know this may freak out many friends of mine, but I gotta admit, I actually kind of liked her in this movie. I don't think she was the worst Bond girl. Her character, Christmas Jones, originally started as an insurance investigator, but the filmmakers worried that this was too close to the Thomas Crown affair, released the same year in 1999, where Thomas Crown, played by Pierce Brosnan, is being pursued by Catherine Banning, an insurance investigator. And therefore her character was first changed to a bounty hunter, but later changed to a nuclear physicist. And one of the actresses first considered for the role was Jerry Halliwell, aka Ginger Spice. Now remember, they were heavily trying to market this movie to the younger generation. So the role of Christmas Jones came down to Denise Richards and Tiffany Thiessen of Saved by the Bell and Beverly Hills 90210 fame. And I'm not really sure if Tiffany Thiessen would have been that much better, but you can see the studio executives really trying to market to the younger generation of the 90s. Because while the casting of Pierce Brosnan did bring in a much younger demographic to the Bond franchise, MGM wanted an even younger demographic for this movie, and hence they really pushed for Denise Richards, who was highly recognizable to the younger generation of the 90s. And it apparently worked. The movie appealed to a whole new younger demographic, leading to the highest box office of any Bond film, including the previous two, when unadjusted for inflation. Again, adjusted for inflation, it's still Thunderball. However, critics complained that Denise Richards was not credible as a nuclear physicist, and today she is regarded as one of the lower-tiered Bond girls. And another complaint is that her outfit is more reminiscent of Lara Croft the Tomb Raider rather than a PhD nuclear scientist. And Denise Richards even won a Razzie Award for Worst Supporting Actress. That said, if you're going to enjoy this movie, you just have to shut off your brain and just go with it, because Denise Richards is so beautiful, and it's not difficult to just lean back and have a fun time. And I think she is a pretty good actor here. I really didn't mind her. I thought her acting was fine. I thought she was much better than Stacey Sutton in A View to a Kill, and her character wasn't as annoying as Mary Goodnight in The Man with the Golden Gun. And Denise Richards had a great time starring in this movie and felt that Pierce Brosnan was a total class act. And to this day, she is very honored to have gotten to play a Bond girl. Now I'm curious, were you able to shut off your brain and just enjoy her in the movie? or was she too much of a deal breaker? Where do you rank her among the Bond girls? Let me know in the comments below. So Denise Richards was born in Illinois, and her family moved to California when she was 15. And in high school, she was voted best looking. And after high school, she worked as a model, traveling to New York, Paris, and Tokyo. And then she landed several TV and movie spots, including small roles in Loaded Weapon 1 and bit parts in Saved by the Bell, Married with Children, and Doogie Howser. However, her big break came when she starred in the 1997 film Starship Troopers. And she was voted Blockbuster Entertainment's favorite female newcomer. And in 1998, she starred in the erotic thriller Wild Things with Neve Campbell. And then in 1999, she was cast in this film. And from here, she'd go on to an incredible film and TV career, including a very memorable role in Friends as Ross and Monica Geller's cousin, Cassie Geller, in the episode The One with Ross and Monica's Cousin. And in 1999, she was ranked number 9 in Maxim's 50 Sexiest Women. And in 2001, she was voted number 2 in FHM's 100 Sexiest Women. And number 19 in AskMen.com's 50 Most Beautiful Women. And let's face it, she is almost ridiculously beautiful. And I really like the fact that Elektra King turns out to be the main villain of the movie. And if you think about it, Renard was just the henchman. Yeah, he was just the heavy. She will go down in Bond franchise history to be the first Bond villain that was a woman. And they almost did it with Octopussy, because that was how Octopussy was pitched. But in the end, they made her an actual Bond girl. They made her an ally. But here, they actually do it. And I think it totally works. She is effectively evil. And when I saw this for the first time, I totally fell for it. I was completely fooled, and I was shocked when she turned out to be the villain. There's that moment at the end, that tense moment where you don't know if Bond can actually shoot her. And he does shoot her, just right there in cold blood. And it's such an excellent James Bond moment. And it really tells you a lot about the hardcore character of Bond. But it totally worked. Oh, that scene it gives you shivers. Now, in this movie, James Bond drives a BMW Z8, which was part of a 3-picture product placement deal between Eon and BMW. And other product placement deals include Bollinger, Smirnoff, Omega, Motorola, Electronic Arts, Microsoft, Caterpillar, and Heineken. And for The World Is Not Enough, film studio MGM generated over $100 million in revenue through product placement deals, offsetting the huge $130 million budget. So essentially, that brought this movie's budget to around $30 million. And then, of course, some on top of that for marketing. Now, when the real MI6 learned that the movie wanted to shoot the scene around the headquarters, they actually denied it and took extra steps to prohibit it, citing it being a security risk. However, the Foreign Secretary at the time, Robin Cook, at the urging of the members of Parliament, Janet Anderson, actually overruled them and allowed Eon to shoot around the MI6 headquarters. And she said, after all Bond has done for Britain, it was the last thing we could do for Bond. And I think that is totally awesome. Eon also teamed up with MTV once again to market to American youths. And this was still when MTV was hot, when they were still playing music videos and still had the pulse on the youth demographic. Now remember, they did this before with A View to a Kill, but this time I think they went full throttle to market to the younger demographic, and I think it was a little more successful this time around compared to A View to a Kill. And to build up to the excitement of The World Is Not Enough premiere, MTV broadcast over 100 hours of James Bond movies with Denise Richards presenting the movies. The film starts in Bilbao, Spain, where Bond is having a meeting with a Swiss banker to retrieve money that belongs to Robert King. And during this meeting, a beautiful cigar girl walks in, and Bond sort of does a double take, and she is Maria Grazia Cucinotta, who is really an experienced assassin working for the villain. And in the movie, she is simply named as the Cigar Girl, but in the novelization of World Is Not Enough, her name is Giulietta da Vinci. And while the goons think they have the upper hand on Bond, he activates a trigger in his glasses that blows up his gun, and then he kills all of the goons. And then he gives the most hardcore look, and it is awesome. And whatever you think of this movie, you have to concede that Pierce Brosnan is at his best here as 007. And he grabs the last goon for information, but suddenly he is killed by a knife to the back of the head, and it's the Cigar Girl, The Spanish police arrive and it looks like Bond may be trapped, but he makes an impressive escape by finding an elastic rope and tying it to one of the goons and then tie it to himself and jumps down. However, the goon grabs onto the table, so Bond is stuck about halfway to the ground, but then the table leg breaks, allowing Bond to go all the way to the ground floor as he coolly walks away with the briefcase full of money. And in a deleted scene, we would have found out that Renard actually was the sniper that helped James Bond. However, director Michael Apted felt that this was a fairly unimpressive introduction to Renard, whereas his introduction later in the movie was very impressive, so they decided to let that be the introduction of the main villain to us, the audience, thereby giving him a sense of mystery and intrigue throughout the movie. Now, according to the director, this was supposed to be the end of the entire pre-credit action sequence. However, when Michael Apted looked at it, he realized that this pre-credit action scene was way too underwhelming compared to the last two movies, and so he decided to add the entire first opening action sequence of the movie proper, which is the entire boat scene on the Thames. However, this made the opening sequence last 22 minutes, which was way too long, and so Michael Apted had to cut out 7 minutes of that action sequence, which is why the sequence has so many deleted scenes. All in all, the sequence is about 15 minutes long, making it the longest pre-credit action sequence of the entire franchise. But that said, it is an amazing sequence, and I think it is one of the best in the entire franchise. However, there is an interesting controversy about this, because you see, in the screenplay for The World Is Not Enough, the boat chase on the Thames was part of the pre-credit action sequence.
What?
So what gives? Well, either director Michael Apted is seriously misremembering, or he must have actually made the change himself to buff up the boat chase and add it after the credits, only to reinsert it back to the pre-credits. So we are still in the pre-credit action sequence when Bond goes to the MI6 building and he flirts with Moneypenny. And I love this scene because I love the dynamic between Pierce Brosnan and Samantha Bond, which brings back the electric chemistry between Sean Connery and Lois Maxwell. And then we learn that M is an old friend of Robert King. And Robert King thanks Bond for retrieving the money, and he heads home with it. But whoever stole the money, the villain, has created an improvised explosive device known as an IED, often called a fertilizer bomb. And the money itself was the bomb, because the cash was dipped in urea, which is heavy in nitrogen similar to ammonium nitrate, and it was dried and put in the briefcase. And Bond, who handled the cash, now has urea on his fingertips. And then when he touches the ice, which is water, because when urea and water mix, it creates an endothermic reaction that cools the surroundings. This alerts Bond to the fact that there was something suspicious about the money. He runs to Robert King to prevent him from touching the money. However, it is too late. The lapel on Robert King electronically detonates a magnesium strip on one of the bills, causing an exothermic reaction that blows up the briefcase full of urea, killing Robert King. And Bond looks out of a hole made by the explosion and he sees the cigar girl who has a drop on him with an automatic machine gun and almost shoots him. Bond goes to Q Labs and takes Q's new prototype boat.
Stop! You didn't finish!
And this leads to an exciting boat chase on the Thames. This little boat is amazing. It's a tiny one-seater that's fast and agile. And when the cigar girl almost gets away due to a dropping bridge, Bond's boat goes underwater, and while underwater, he straightens out his tie. And that has to be one of the most Bond moments of all. And that moment was the idea of Pierce Brosnan. The cigar girl then blocks Bond's path on the Thames, and it looks like she'll get away, but Bond sees a path through a canal that will require him to go some of it on land, which he does, plowing through a fish market, and even goes right through a nice restaurant. And they meet head on, and Bond shoots a torpedo, but the cigar girl is able to get her boat to the coast before the torpedo blows up. And Bond chases the cigar girl to the Millennium Dome, and she steals a hot air balloon. However, Bond jumps on a rope, and the cigar girl can't quite shoot him, but she sees that the police have arrived, and she'll be captured, and she can't be captured. But Bond offers protection to the cigar girl, but she chooses to commit suicide by blowing up the balloon rather than be taken by the police. Bond falls off the hot air balloon and onto the Millennium Dome where he injures his shoulder. And there's a scene where he rolls and he was supposed to catch himself on the wires but misses. And this was not intentional. The stuntman really just actually missed the wires and continued to roll down. And the shot looked so good and looked so dangerous, because it was dangerous, that Michael Apted chose to use it in the print of the movie. And thus ends one of the most action-packed sequences in the history of the franchise. And this entire scene is a heart-pounding, jaw-dropping action sequence that ranks as one of the best in the Bond movies. And the entire sequence took 7 weeks to film. And for the longest time, it was the longest pre-credit action sequence until 2021, when No Time to Die's pre-credit action sequence clocked in at 20 minutes. For the movie end credits, the visual theme is oil, since this is going to be a movie about oil and pipelines. And it was created by Daniel Kleinman, who did the visuals for GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. And the visual montage starts with James Bond, who's injured his shoulder by falling on top of the Millennium Dome, slowly getting up and clutching his shoulder, knowing that he's really injured it. And it's a nice continuation from the opening pre-credit action sequence to the music montage. The song was performed by Garbage, and I don't know much about this group, but the song is okay. It's not one of the best songs of Bond, but it's not a bad song. I'd say it's adequate. It is good enough. And David Arnold returns for the musical score, and this time, in all the songs, David Arnold heavily relied on the Monty Norman James Bond theme, plus all of its variations, to inform the musical score of the movie. And then we start the movie proper, we go to Robert King's funeral, and we're introduced to Elektra King, who is strikingly beautiful, and Bond becomes fascinated by her. And since the MI6 office has been compromised, they go to their backup secret headquarters in Scotland. And this is the Eileen Donan Castle that was also used in the movie Highlander. And in the office, behind our M, played by Dame Judi Dench, you can see a painting of the Bernard Lee M, aka Miles Messervy. And M briefs all the double O's in a scene reminiscent of Thunderball. And like Thunderball, there is actually a female 00 agent. M vows to bring justice to whoever killed Robert King. And when all the other 00s get their mission brief, Bond doesn't get one since he's not been medically cleared due to his shoulder injury. So Bond seduces and manipulates the female doctor to medically clear him before the shoulder has fully healed. And Bond visits Q, and we learn that the Q boat was actually Q's fishing boat that he was working on for his retirement.
My fishing boat. For my retirement.
Now, in the last movie, Tomorrow Never Dies, they actually considered filming this little goodbye scene. However, they were certain that Desmond Llewellyn could return for one more movie, and so they held off until this film. And here, it's a very touching moment where Desmond Llewellyn actually gets to say goodbye and gets a really nice send-off. And we meet his new assistant, played by John Cleese, who plays a comedic bumbling role. And I am a huge John Cleese fan. Monty Python, Fawlty Towers are two of my favorite pieces of entertainment. And A Fish Called Wanda is one of my favorite 80s movies. So if you told me that John Cleese was going to replace Q in the James Bond movies, I would have bet anything that it would have been gold. But now that we have him here, I don't think it really works. And I think the reason why is that Q was so funny because he was not a comedian. We laughed because Q was genuinely frustrated with Bond, and we felt it with him. But when you cast a real comedian, one of the best comedians of all time, I wonder if it undermines what made Q so charming. Well, this scene really ended up being Desmond Llewellyn's sign-off, and it's a very touching moment, because it would be the last time Desmond Llewellyn plays Q after playing him in 17 movies, 5 different James Bond actors, 3 M actors, 3 Moneypenny actresses, and had been there ever since From Russia with Love. And he'd become a James Bond staple. And so Q says, I've always tried to teach you 2 things.
First, never let them see you bleed.
And the second?
Always have an escape plan.
And it's such a great, touching moment. However, after shooting this scene, the filmmakers, as Desmond Llewellyn himself, actually believed that he might be able to do one more movie after this. So they thought maybe they'll hold on to this scene or just put it in anyway. But suddenly, about 3 weeks after filming had wrapped, Desmond Llewellyn was at a convention signing autographs, and while driving home, he got into a car accident and died in that accident. And I'll talk a little more about the details of that accident later in this video. Now, Bond begins to research Elektra King, and he learns that she had been kidnapped as a child, and he starts to feel a sympathy for her. He begins to feel a connection. and he learns that the money he retrieved for Robert King was about £3 million, and when exchanged into US dollars equals exactly $5 million, the exact amount of the kidnapping ransom. And he deduces that there must be a connection and that the kidnapper, Renard, must be back. Bond discovers that Elektra's file is locked, and only M would have the ability to do that. So Bond confronts her, and she reveals that when Elektra was kidnapped, Robert King wanted to pay the kidnappers the $5 million ransom, but M suggested that he not pay them, knowing that this would lead to Elektra being tortured longer. We also learn the supervillain origins of Renard from the MI6 doctor who was in an unprofessional relationship with Bond and cleared him early. And she tells us that during the time of the kidnapping, M sent 009 after him, and 009 put a bullet in Renard's head. But it didn't kill him, but rather damaged his brain.
It's moving through the medulla oblongata, killing off his senses.
The medulla oblongata.
So that he doesn't feel pain and he has no senses. And he only grows stronger until the bullet will eventually kill him. So, okay, I'm not quite sure I know what that medical condition is, but I'll go with it. M and Bond assume that Renard may be going after Elektra King once again, and so Bond is sent to protect her. And Bond goes to Azerbaijan to meet up with Elektra King and tells her that she may be in danger, but she refuses his help. Bond is insistent, but Elektra just doesn't feel that she needs his protection. And in Azerbaijan, we get the return of Universal Exports, which is the cover identity of MI6 and was created by Ian Fleming and first appeared in his second novel, Live and Let Die. Now, one of the criticisms of this movie were the lackluster exotic locales, because the James Bond franchise has taken us to some beautiful and exotic and impressive locales in the past. And this location here, the oil fields of Azerbaijan, as well as a nuclear site in Kazakhstan, later in the movie, really seems less impressive. Well, the screenwriters Neal, Purvis, and Robert Wade actually had a reason for doing this, and it's actually pretty interesting, because in the 1960s, the James Bond franchise was known for their exotic locations which could take an audience to places they had never seen before. For example, in 1967, You Only Live Twice took Americans and British audiences to Japan, a place most Americans had never really seen. And this is because there was not much world traveling in the 1960s. Well, in 1999, world traveling to exotic places like Japan and India had become so common that the writers wanted to take the audience to places that they'd definitely never seen before. Places like Baku, Azerbaijan, and the Bosphorus River in Istanbul. And as you can see, these are very beautiful cities. And they also wanted to show the dreary oil fields of Azerbaijan and the leftover nuclear sites of Kazakhstan. But the crew decided not to film there. And in fact, this scene was actually filmed in Spain, which filled in for both the oil fields of Azerbaijan and the abandoned Soviet nuclear facility in Kazakhstan. Oh well. However, Baku, Azerbaijan and the Bosphorus River in Istanbul are real. In Azerbaijan, we see Elektra has taken over her father's company and is extending the pipelines, but she also has a heart of gold. And the character of Elektra King is half British and half Azerbaijani. English oil magnate Robert King married a local Azerbaijani woman, and they had Elektra King. And when the locals riot to prevent the pipeline from going through their town, Elektra meets with the town clergy and offers to save the town and build the pipeline around their village, despite it costing them millions. It wins her over to us, and we feel that she has a conscience and a strong moral code, even though we'll later learn that we'll be wrong. Now Bond sees this, and he is immediately impressed with her. And Bond tells her that she may be in danger, but she refuses his help once again. And Elektra reminds Bond that she has many enemies, including 3 Russian competitors who are all trying to kill her. But Bond is insistent, but again, Elektra just doesn't feel she needs MI6's protection. And we begin to wonder if Elektra King may have a death wish. And we'll learn later in the movie how much that's true.
You'll be safe here.
I don't want to be safe.
And in the background in Azerbaijan, we see these helicopters with 5 blades underneath them. And these are meant to cut trees. These will appear later when they're used as weapons that destroy Zhukovsky's caviar factory. And in case you're wondering if these are real, no, they're not. They actually were designed as weapons, specifically for this movie. Later, the two go skiing in order to inspect the pipelines of Azerbaijan in the mountains. And incidentally, this was not filmed in Azerbaijan, but rather filmed in Chamonix, France. Later, the two go skiing, and Elektra's outfit evokes Tracy Bond's ski outfit in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And the idea is for us to similarly root for this love story between Bond and Elektra, only to be shocked later and have the rug pulled out from underneath us when we discover that she was the villain. And I remember when it was revealed that Elektra King was the villain, I was genuinely surprised because it just came out of nowhere, and I loved it. What about you? Were you surprised by the reveal? Let me know in the comments below. And as Bond and Elektra ski, a group of parasailing snowmobiles try to kill them. And as Bond skis, 4 Parahawks appear. And it's a cool action sequence, and it's very different. So Bond lures the 4 Parahawks into the trees, where he gets 2 of them to crash into the trees and causes the other 2 to crash into each other by skiing over one of them, ripping their parachute, causing him to lose control, crashing into the final Parahawk. And when this causes an avalanche, Bond uses the inflatable ball, and while encased in the ball, Elektra has a flashback that causes a mental decompensation. And we see that Bond is concerned and is genuinely starting to care for her. We will later learn that Renard has sent these Parahawks in order to kill Bond. Elektra tries to seduce Bond, but Bond puts his duty first to M, and he refuses, at least for now. Bond visits his old friend, KGB-turned-gangster, Valentin Zukovsky, who now runs a legitimate casino. And he's played by Robbie Coltrane, better known as Hagrid in the Harry Potter series, in reprising his role once again since GoldenEye, now channeling Rick in Casablanca. And Bond tries to get information on who those hitmen were. And here Bond uses his X-ray glasses. And if you were a little kid in the 1970s, you remember every comic book advertised X-ray glasses for $1.49. And they claim to let you be able to see through people's clothes and see the skeleton on your fingers. And if you ever bought them, they were, of course, a complete scam. But well, James Bond fulfills our 9-year-old's wish by having real X-ray specs. And then we get one of those really cool James Bond moments when he orders a drink and a bouncer tries to manhandle him. The bouncer approaches to rough him up, and he knocks the bouncer down, grabs the bouncer's own knife, uses the knife to pin him down, and then takes the bouncer's own gun and slowly and calmly hands it to the bartender and calmly sips his vodka martini.
Shaken, not stirred.
Such a great moment. Bond is taken to Zukovsky, where he tells Bond that there are 3 rival oil companies that are competing with Elektra King. And then suddenly, Elektra walks into the casino, and she plays a game of high card draw for $1 million. And Bond is very concerned for her and even tries to help by having the dealer burn the top 3 cards. She draws a queen, but Zukovsky draws an ace. An ace of clubs, which is a little on the nose. And it's a weird scene, but Bond now feels that something just isn't right. So Elektra tries to seduce Bond once again, and Bond refuses once again. So good for you, Mr. Bond. And then in a few minutes, Bond and Elektra make love.
Finally!
Meanwhile, we learn that Elektra's head of security, Davidoff, is working for Renard. And almost halfway through the movie, we finally meet the main villain, 48 minutes into the film. And Robert Carlyle is almost unrecognizable as Renard. And he's angry at Davidoff and Dr. Mikhail Arkhov for failing to kill Bond with the Parahawks. And we see that he can't feel pain, and when he punishes Davidoff for not killing Bond, he picks up a hot coal, and Renard clearly can't feel it, and makes Davidoff hold it. Although it doesn't really explain why Renard's skin just isn't burnt right off the bone. Arkhov blames Davidoff for the failure, but Renard kills him instead of Davidoff, and they throw his body into the trunk of Davidoff's car. Bond exchanges himself with the body of Arkhov, and when Davidoff opens the trunk to grab Arkhov's body, Bond shoots him and kills him. And Renard's men escape Bond for Dr. Mikhail Arkhov, and they take him on the plane to Kazakhstan. And in Kazakhstan, an international team is disarming an old Soviet arsenal of nuclear missiles. However, Renard and his team plan to go there and steal a nuclear missile for their own nefarious purposes. And in Kazakhstan, Bond poses as Arkhov, and we meet Christmas Jones, the nuclear physicist played by Denise Richards, who is there working for the international team. Bond then comes face to face with the main villain Renard, who reveals that it was indeed he who spared his life at the beginning of the movie, so that he could deliver the money to Robert King. Now Bond has a drop on Renard, who says,
"There's no point living if you can't feel alive."
Which Bond remembers Elektra saying.
There's no point in living if you can't feel alive.
And this is the second clue that something strange is going on with Renard and Elektra. Now Christmas Jones comes in with military security because she has discovered that Bond is an imposter and that the real Dr. Arkoff is a 63-year-old fat guy. Of course, we know that Arkoff was working for Renard and that Renard had killed him earlier. Renard kills the military security and escapes with one of the missiles. And then we get a cool 007 moment as Bond uses an Omega watch as a grappling gun and then dives through the door as it closes, all in hot pursuit of Renard and a nuclear missile. And it's peak Bond. He takes out many of Renard's goons, but Renard manages to escape with the missile, leaving a bomb with a 5-second detonation. And Christmas Jones seals the door and Bond barely gets through, but singes his back. And during the stuntman actually did burn the back of his jacket. Bond and Christmas make it out, and I love how Bond introduces himself. He says, "Name's Bond." And then the lift takes him up and he finishes, "James Bond." And the two barely escape the explosion. Elektra calls M and says that Bond is missing and plays the innocent victim and convinces M to come to Azerbaijan to help her. M arrives at Azerbaijan to help Elektra, but Bond has arrived as well and confronts Elektra about working with Renard, which she denies. And Bond tells M that he suspects Elektra as the inside man, but of course M just can't believe it. And Elektra is able to convince Bond that Renard is the real villain and that he has planted a plutonium bomb in one of her pipelines. Bond and Christmas go to defuse the bomb, but they're too late. They take a pig, aka a pipeline inspection gauge, which can maintain pipelines without stopping the flow of oil, and they ride it at high speed, reminiscent of a roller coaster ride. In fact, the last time we saw the pig was in the beginning of The Living Daylights. Bond and Christmas get on the pig with the bomb, but they realize that someone has tampered with it, and half the plutonium is missing. And they let the bomb explode, and sure enough, it is a dud. It wasn't nuclear. Elektra assumes that Bond is dead, and then Elektra reveals to M that she is indeed working with Renard, and that it was she that killed her own father, Robert King. She still has a grudge against M for convincing her father not to pay the ransom when she was kidnapped and for using her as bait for MI6 to capture Renard. And she kills M's bodyguards and takes M prisoner. And then Elektra pulls a Michael Corleone by destroying the competing pipelines. And we learn that Renard and Elektra are lovers, and they abduct M and keep her locked up just as Elektra was locked up when she was kidnapped in her youth. Bond and Christmas go to Istanbul, Turkey, and they go to Zhukovsky's caviar factory. However, one of Zhukovsky's men, Mr. Bullion, aka Bull, get it? He has gold bullion in his teeth, and Mr. Bullion is played by Clifford Price, aka Goldie. And Mr. Bullion is working for Renard and Elektra. And Bond asks Zhukovsky why Elektra gave him $1 million payoff. And Zhukovsky informs him that it was a payoff for the use of an old Soviet submarine that Zhukovsky owns that is piloted by his own nephew. And Elektra sends a helicopter with 5 buzzsaws after Bond. And Bond gets inside his BMW and uses its missiles to destroy the helicopter, but then there's a second helicopter with buzzsaws which cuts Bond's BMW in half. It's so sad to see such a beautiful car like the BMW literally cut in half. But then Bond blows up the helicopter, but before it destroys Zhukovsky's caviar factory. And Bond, Christmas, and Zhukovsky learn that Elektra plans to use the plutonium and use the submarine's nuclear reactor to cause a nuclear meltdown and use it to destroy Istanbul. And with Istanbul destroyed, along with her other competitors' pipelines, which all run through Istanbul, Elektra's pipeline, which was the only pipeline that went around Istanbul, would significantly increase in value. And this plot is an homage to Goldfinger's plan to destroy Fort Knox, making his own gold supply increase in value, as well as Max Zorin's plot to destroy Silicon Valley, increasing the value of his own microchips. In her cell, M uses a battery and uses it to activate her GPS locator to send Bond her exact location, which is at Maiden's Tower. But Goldie betrays Zhukovsky, plants a bomb, and captures Bond and Christmas and brings them to Renard. However, Zhukovsky actually will use the location sent by M to rescue Bond. Renard commandeers a submarine, murders the crew and throws them overboard, which includes Zukovsky's nephew. Renard then says goodbye to Elektra because a nuclear meltdown is a suicide mission. Christmas Jones is taken to Renard on the submarine, and Bond is taken to Maiden's Tower, where he'll be tortured by Elektra. And Elektra tells Bond,
I could have given you the world.
And Bond says,
The world is not enough.
and then he tells her it's a family motto. Elektra hooks Bond up to a garrote and begins to choke him, and this is really painful. Brosnan really nails how painful it must be. But Zukovsky finds the location M sent Bond, and he goes to rescue 007. And Zukovsky kills his henchman, Mr. Bouillon, who betrayed him. And Zukovsky tries to rescue his nephew, but Elektra shoots Zukovsky, who, with his last dying breath, shoots the arm brace off Bond, freeing him. Oh man, and this is why Zukovsky is one of my favorite Bond allies. And I really wish that it turned out that he survives to return in the next movie, because he is so awesome. And he's almost as much of a hero of this movie as Bond is. Hashtag justice for Zukovsky. Bond is now free, and Elektra runs up the tower, and Bond goes after her. And he sees M in a cell, and he frees her. Bond has the drop on Elektra, but she gives her an innocent look and almost wins Bond over. But when Elektra orders her men to kill him, Bond shoots Elektra in cold blood. And the scene echoes Bond's shooting of Dr. Kaufman in Tomorrow Never Dies, giving both movies an interesting symmetry. And M arrives just in time to see Bond kill Elektra. What a cold-blooded but incredible scene. Bond dives off the tower and infiltrates Renard's submarine, and he makes it in just before the submarine dives. And Bond kills several of Renard's goons and causes the submarine to dive straight into the bottom of the sea, which causes a leak of seawater into the sub. And Bond makes it to Renard, who is about to trigger the meltdown, but Bond and Renard fight, and Renard almost has the upper hand, but Bond tells him that he just killed Elektra, and Renard loses it. And he almost causes a meltdown, but Bond kills him by penetrating his body with the plutonium rod. And Bond and Christmas escape Renard's submarine just before it explodes. James Bond and Christmas Jones clean up, and it's New Year's Eve 1999, and the two celebrate the ringing of the new millennium in Turkey. And this is a nice scene to end the movie, with fireworks. M, Moneypenny, Chief of Staff Bill Tanner, and Deputy Chief of Staff are in the MI6 secret office at the Scotland Castle safe house, and R locates Bond's heat signature with a satellite. However, at first they only see Bond, but then realizes that there's actually two people. And then we get the final line of the movie, which is arguably the worst groaner in the entire Bond franchise, and it's so bad that I'm not even going to repeat it here. So thus ends a really great Bond film. And I remember this movie having mixed reviews when it came out, but I absolutely love this movie. And time has been a little kinder to this film, as with all Pierce Brosnan films. And sadly, this film also marks the end of an era. This is the last film where Desmond Llewellyn will play Q. Desmond Llewellyn starred in 17 Bond films from 1963, From Russia with Love, all the way to the present to this film. In fact, the only movie he wasn't in was Live and Let Die. And he's been in more 007 films than any other single actor. Now, Desmond Llewellyn was 85 years old during the filming of The World Is Not Enough, and in this film, he alludes to his retirement by introducing his new assistant R, played by John Cleese, but in actuality, Desmond Llewellyn was not planning to retire from the film and was just setting up his retirement for the future, just in case his health didn't allow him to continue in the future, or EM producers did not let him be in any more films. However, after filming the scene, Llewellyn felt that he was in good health, he felt great, he felt strong, and he stated in interviews that he felt he could be in maybe one or maybe two more Bond movies. And it was realistic that he can do at least one, and pretty reasonable that he could do two. Unfortunately, 2 weeks after the premiere of this film, he was in a head-on collision and died from injuries of that accident. And investigations were conducted, and it was judged to be an accident. Apparently he was on a small road, and he was passing another car on the small road and smashed into an oncoming car. And the passenger of the car that he smashed into had a lot of injuries and almost died, but eventually ended up surviving the accident. So during the video release, they dedicated the movie to Desmond Llewellyn. The World Is Not Enough had its world premiere, not in England, but in Los Angeles on November 8, 1999, and it is only the third James Bond movie to premiere outside of England. The premiere was held at the Fox Bruin Theater in Westwood, Los Angeles, which is the typical standard Hollywood movie location, but very uncommon for a Bond film. Well, The World Is Not Enough did very well at the box office. Made on a budget of $136 million, $100 million of it was from product placement, costing the filmmakers only $36 million, although of course there are marketing costs. It ended up raking $126 million in the US and then went on to make $362 million worldwide and became the highest grossing Bond film at the time, unadjusted for inflation. Again, adjusted for inflation, it was still Thunderball. The film was nominated for a Saturn Award for Best Action, Adventure, and Thriller. Pierce Brosnan won both the Empire Award and the Blockbuster Entertainment Award as Best Actor, and David Arnold won the BMI Film Music Award for his score on this movie. But the movie did receive mixed reviews, and while everyone thought Pierce Brosnan was in top form as James Bond and praised the action sequences, most critics did not like the writing of the script and slammed the paint-by-numbers story, while many critics praised Sophie Marceau's performance. And Roger Ebert said that the film was a splendid comic thriller, exciting and graceful and endlessly invented, and gave it 3.5 stars out of 4 stars, and gave a huge thumbs up. And he also praised Denise Richards' performance, calling her first rate. However, not all critics love Denise Richards' performance, and she has been panned and is often considered one of the lower-tiered Bond girls. And I actually think it's unfair, because it's become cliche to make fun of her, that she's not a believable physicist. Denise Richards did become the first Bond series to win a Golden Raspberry Award when Denise Richards was chosen as Worst Supporting Actress at the 1999 Razzie Awards. But Richards and Brosnan were also nominated for Worst Screen Couple, but lost to Will Smith and Kevin Kline for Wild Wild West. And today, this does remain a controversial Bond film, and it is generally considered one of the lower-tiered Bond films. MSN ranks it as the 3rd worst Bond film in the entire franchise, and Entertainment Weekly ranks it as the 5th worst Bond film. Rolling Stone magazine also ranks it as their 5th worst Bond film. And Forbes is probably the kindest, ranking it in the middle, number 15 out of 23. As for me, I find this a thoroughly enjoyable Bond film and a seminal movie in the history of the James Bond lore. So I'm curious, what did you think of The World Is Not Enough? Please let me know in the comments below. So that ends this video on The World Is Not Enough. How do you rank this movie in the pantheon of James Bond films? And if you enjoyed this video, check out my other videos on other James Bond movies, on the Star Trek films, on Star Wars, and comedies like Popeye and Airplane. Well, that ends this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.